All right. So the DSM-5, which is our current edition, it is considered the manual we use in the United States to understand, classify, and diagnose mental health problems. Now, I say in the United States because the DSM in of itself is a product of the American Psychiatric Association, but there is a competing manual called the ICD, which is more of an international classification of disorders. So there is a strong symmetry, a strong overlap between the two, but it's important to note that there are some conditions in the ICD that uh, have not yet made it into the DSM and vice versa. For example, if we were to think of internet gaming, right, as an addictive uh, disorder, that's not yet in the DSM-5, right? But it is in the ICD. So it's important to understand there are differences. Now, the DSM, I keep using the abbreviation, but it stands for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Now it's in the fifth edition, and that fifth edition underwent a text revision about a year ago. And that's what we use. Now there are over 400, probably over 500 disorders, if I'm going to be more precise in my numbers, that are linked to psychological impairment. Now, I refer to the DSM as the cookbook of the mind because in a cookbook, you have recipes, right? And recipes require you to have a certain number of ingredients and they have to come together for a final product. So the same thing is to be said about mental illness. If we are going to diagnose a person with a psychological disorder, they need to meet a certain number of criteria, a certain number of symptoms in order to be diagnosed with a condition. And that's very, very important. Now, before I go to our first class of disorders, I also want to say that the DSM-5 did a very good job relative to earlier editions in acknowledging cultural variations. So there is a whole section on cultural dependent syndromes. There's research that talks about how a given condition shows up within a certain community and so forth. Now, the DSM-4 did some of that as well. So it's not just the DSM-5, but early editions like the original DSM and the second DSM, especially in those cases, and to some degree the third DSM, was linked by psychoanalysis. It was influenced by psychoanalysis. So there's less research support, there's less cultural variations being attended to, and so forth. But so it does a good job. Another really important change is that there's a focus on spectrum-based conditions versus discrete categories. And in some disorders, yeah, it is a specific condition. So major depressive disorder, that is its own condition. However, things like autism spectrum disorder is a broad range of features and manifestations. So instead of just having autistic disorder by itself, the DSM-5 uses autism spectrum disorders, which acknowledges traditional autism, PDD or pervasive developmental disorder, Rett disorder, childhood disintegrative disorder, and Asperger's. All of these have been absorbed into one set or spectrum of conditions. So that's the DSM. And you will see we'll go through different classes of conditions, but there are criteria that need to be met.